Gamma oscillation plays a role in binding process or sensory integration, a process by which several brain areas beside primary cortex are activated for higher perception of the received stimulus. Beta oscillation is also involved in interpreting received stimulus and occurs following gamma oscillation, and this process is known as gamma to beta transition, a process for neglecting unnecessary stimuli in surrounding environment. Gamma oscillation also associates with cognitive functions, memory, and emotion. Therefore, modulation of the brain activity can lead to manipulation of cognitive functions. The stimulus used in this study was 40 Hz binaural beat because binaural beat induces frequency following response. This study aimed to investigate the neural oscillation responding to the 40 Hz binaural beat and to evaluate working memory function and emotional states after listening to that stimulus. 2 experiments were developed based on the study aims. In the first experiment, electroencephalograms were recorded while participants listened to the stimulus for 30 minutes. The results suggested that frontal, temporal, and central regions were activated within 15 minutes. In the second experiment, word list recall task was conducted before and after listening to the stimulus for 20 minutes. The results showed that, after listening, the recalled words were increased in the working memory portion of the list. Brunel Mood Scale, a questionnaire to evaluate emotional states, revealed changes in emotional states after listening to the stimulus. The emotional results suggested that these changes were consistent with the induced neural oscillations. Gamma oscillation is neural oscillation that maintain long-range communication in the brain, Fries, 2005, including the communication between thalamus and cerebral cortex and within cerebral cortices themselves, Linas et al., 2002. Thalamus and cerebral cortex, normally, communicate via thalamocortical circuit including 2 types of thalamic neurons which are thalamic core neurons and thalamic matrix cells. The former sends projection fibers to specific cortical areas, i.e., primary auditory cortex, while the later send projection fibers to widespread cortical areas, i.e., other auditory areas. These connections, including connections within cerebral cortices, communicate to one another by synchronization of neural activities which oscillate at the same frequency. Jones, 2009. The occurred oscillation which is generated for schema sending is gamma oscillation, Linas and Ribery, 1993. Gamma oscillation is associated with arousal maintenance of the brain during waking state, Vanderwolf, 2000, Gray, 1999, Gray and Singer, 1989, Linas and Pear, 1991. It is found during consciousness, and the oscillation pattern is interrupted when lack of consciousness occurs. These are clearly observed in rats. During normal postures, which are head held up against gravity and eyes open, gamma oscillation pattern was found. After the rats were treated with some medicine to let them in stupor, gamma oscillation pattern was disrupted by suppression. However, the experiment indicated that slow-wave oscillation was generated in the rat's brain when they were immobile in waking state. This slow wave is explained as similar to alpha oscillation in humans. Therefore, it is related to consciousness during waking state. In addition to association to arousal and consciousness, gamma oscillation also plays an important role in sensory integration process. Ross and Fujioka, 2016, Linas and Ribery, 1993, Mima et al., 2000, Pantev et al., 1991, Tallon-Baudry et al., 1996, Bertrand and Tallon-Baudry, 2000. When a stimulus is received by receptors and transduced into signal sending to the brain, primary area of the brain related to the signal is active to process the signal. This mechanism leads to sense that stimulus. However, to perceive higher perception or to process more detail of the stimulus, other brain areas related to the primary area must cooperate during the process. Fries, 2005, Ross and Fujioka, 2016, Gray et al., 1989. For example, after auditory information is received, primary auditory cortex analyzes that auditory stimulus, Harris et al., 2009. Other auditory features, such as the meaning of that stimulus, are required other brain areas to process, Harris et al., 2009, Vermeer et al., 2016. The process that integrates, groups, and analyzes the received information is called binding process or sensory integration. One piece of evidence supporting binding process is aging. Elderly are frequently found to be able to hear sound but unable to understand what has been heard. Martin and Jerger, 2005. This occurs because binding process is impaired in elderly. Ross and Fujioka, 2016. Vermeer et al., 2016. Binding process occurs by cooperation among several brain areas via connections between thalamus and cerebral cortex and within cerebral cortices themselves. Therefore, that cooperation is synchronization among those brain areas. The mentioned synchronization is neural synchronization, which corresponds to gamma oscillation. Therefore, gamma oscillation is an important mechanism underlying the binding process. Another interested point is that gamma oscillation plays an important underlying role in cognitive functions. Fries, 2009, Fries et al., 2007, Ward, 2003, Jensen et al., 2007, Herman et al., 2004. By which attention level of an individual increases while gazing on an object, gamma oscillation also increases. However, when visual field of attention is shifted to the other side, gamma oscillation evokes in contralateral hemisphere. Ward et al., 2006. Another piece of evidence is gazing at a moving bar. Muller et al., 1996. In the previous study, there were two types of moving bars. The first type was one long bar moving in one direction, and the other type was two short bars moving in opposite direction. The first case, long bar, induced gamma oscillation in humans, while the second case, two short bars, did not induce gamma oscillation. The results of both attention and moving bar support sensory integration, or binding process. When attention level increases, several brain areas have to function to analyze higher perception of the stimulus. In addition, gazing at long moving bar requires two eyes coordinating together and leading to binding process, while gazing at two short moving bars does not require coordination. A previous study claimed that gamma oscillation and memory process associates and links to each other. Tallon-Baudry et al., 1998. In that experiment, visual task was conducted in participants. When the same previous object was presented, gamma oscillation was observed in the brain at frontal sites. Moreover, prefrontal cortex is an important role in emotional responses beside amygdala, hippocampus, and anterior cingulate. Changes in emotional states induce gamma oscillation in prefrontal part of the brain. Damasio, 1995, Davidson, 1992, Davidson et al., 1990, Derryberry and Tucker, 1992, Davidson and Hugdahl, 1995. It can be clearly seen that gamma oscillation associates with cognition process. Cognition is the mental action or process of acquiring knowledge and understanding through thought, experience, and the senses defined by Oxford Dictionary, English Oxford Living Dictionaries, ND. It includes several processes and mechanisms, for example, attention, memory and working memory, judgment and evaluation, reasoning and computation, problem-solving and decision-making, comprehension and language, and perception. Cognition in humans occurs both during consciousness and unconsciousness. Cognition, normally, can be changed along lifetime by surrounding environment, and new knowledge is also developed by existing knowledge. However, this concept seems to be abstract. Enormous studies have shown that gamma oscillation has been linked with cognition regarding several processes as mentioned. The mentioned gamma oscillation is referred to 40 Hz oscillation, Nadisty, 2010, Fries, 2009, Ross and Fujioka, 2016, John, 2002, Plord et al., 1998. Gamma oscillation is generally displayed in frequency range of 30 to 100 Hz. However, 40 Hz is typically considered as gamma oscillation. This oscillation, 40 Hz, is generated by neural synchronization according to existing evidences. Firstly, 40 Hz auditory steady-state response, ISSR, expresses similar characteristics to fast spiking interneurons, which are hypothesized as main source of gamma oscillation, Vierling-Clausen et al., 2010. Secondly, combination of sensory inputs indicates inconsistencies with temporal dynamics of 40 Hz ASSR onset transition, Ross et al., 2002. This leads to another additional gamma oscillation components. Lastly, changing of stimulus feature or changing of stimulus resets 40 Hz oscillation, Ross, 2008, Ross and Pantev, 2004, Ross et al., 2005, as explained by the binding process. These findings support that 40 Hz oscillation represents gamma oscillation of interest based on several aspects mentioned previously: long-range communication of the brain, sensory integration or binding process, and cognitive-related functions. Another interesting issue of gamma oscillation is the change from gamma oscillation to beta oscillation, which appears after a sufficiently high stimulus intensity is received. Traub et al., 1999, Henschel et al., 2000. This changing phenomenon is called gamma to beta transition. As a stimulus is received into the brain, gamma oscillation occurs in response to that stimulus. If the intensity of the stimulus is high enough, the beta oscillation subsequently appears as a salient activity. Gamma oscillation is normally generated in primary sensory cortex in response to the stimulus and other specific association areas. Barth and McDonald, 1996, Pantev et al., 1991, Pantev, 1995. However, occurred beta oscillation induced by the stimulus is generated in association areas and widespread areas across the cerebral cortex. Ralph Sima et al., 1997, von Stein et al., 1999. In addition, prefrontal cortices also express the beta oscillation. GR et al., 1994, Lovelace et al., 1996, Liu et al., 1992. This gamma to beta transition is seemingly explained as sensory gating. Clements et al., 2002, Crawford et al., 2002, Hong et al., 2004, which is neural process to filter out unnecessary stimuli in the brain from several stimuli in surrounding environment, and is likely described as attention switching. Whittington et al., 1997. Which is one of makers showing that individuals focus their attention on the stimulus. A previous study reported, Kisley and Cornwell, 2006, that increased beta oscillation in gamma to beta transition process is simultaneously observed with increased gamma oscillation in cases of high enough stimulus intensity. Beta oscillation is one of neural oscillations in addition to gamma oscillation. It represents activity in range of 12 to 30 Hz. Beta oscillation is normally observed during normal waking state with consciousness and also corresponds to the brain activity in that brain area. Clements and Blumenfeld, 2001, Caracas and Besar, 1998. For example, beta oscillation over motor cortex are associated with muscle contraction, and over prefrontal cortex reflex focus or selective attention, thinking process, and problem solving. Beta oscillation is also a marker of gamma to beta transition process to illustrate selective attention to the stimulus in sensory gating. It is known that beta oscillation can be split into three groups according to frequency: beta 1, 12 to 15 Hz, beta 2, 15 to 18 Hz, and beta 3, 18 to 25 Hz. Oscillations. However, the 25 to 30 Hz frequency range is also classified as beta oscillation but known as high beta activity. Different ranges of beta oscillation indicate different intensities of brain activity. Due to the functions of the brain mentioned above, the brain expresses its characteristics oscillation activities depending on its functions or behavioral states. Each behavioral state contributes to specific brain characteristic which induces the brain to response. However, counter-process of the responses is also interesting and can be investigated by inducing the brain to display some specific characteristic and, consequently, letting the brain to perform its function. Investigations on the counter-process are lacking, therefore, studying of the brain function after inducing counter-process is needed. This study aims to investigate the brain responses to stimulus and its function during cognitive function, especially memory, utilizing a stimulus to induce some brain characteristics, which are gamma and beta oscillations. These two oscillations relate to sensory binding, brain function in response to stimuli, attention, and memory. Hypotheses of this study are as follows. 1. The brain can be induced by the stimulus and displays some specific characters which are gamma and beta oscillations. And 2. Cognitive function, especially working memory, is changed after the brain is induced by the stimulus. The stimulus used in this study is auditory stimulus, which is binaural beat. Binaural beat is a beat phenomenon occurring in the brain upon receiving of two pure tones that are almost the same in terms of amplitude and intensity, but with slightly different frequencies, separately each ear at the same time. The beat is generated at the superior olivary complex, Kawada et al., 1979, Schwartz and Taylor, 2005, which is the first nucleus in central auditory pathway receiving auditory information from both ears. The occurring beat has frequency equals to the differences of the two pure tones. For example, 250 Hz pure tone is received by the left ear while 290 Hz pure tone is received by the right ear. 40 Hz binaural beat is perceived in the brain, Figure 1. A classical study of binaural beat perception showed that binaural beat with beat frequency of below 35 Hz can be perceived by human perception, but higher beat frequency than 35 Hz are regarded as two different sounds, Oster, 1973. However, recent studies have discussed this issue and demonstrated that beat frequency higher than 35 Hz can be perceived by humans. The studies have also noticed 40 Hz beat frequency can also be perceived. Gross et al., 2012, Ross et al., 2014. Therefore, 40 Hz binaural beat, the stimulus in this study, can be perceived by human participants. One effect of binaural beat is to synchronize firing rate of oscillating brain activity as the binaural beat is perceived, and this effect is called frequency following response, Gross and Mamo, 2012, Wardens and Marsh, 1968. After listening to binaural beat, the brain activity related to the beat frequency of the binaural beat is enhanced. To investigate the proposed hypotheses, two experiments are set up. The first experiment investigates how the brain responds to 40 Hz binaural beat. This experiment reveals the brain positions at which gamma and beta oscillations are enhanced by the binaural beat. The second experiment demonstrates how behavioral state is manipulated following the brain activity changes after listening to the binaural beat, specifically memory function of cognitive function. This experiment illustrates association between cognitive function and the brain activities induced by the binaural beat.